Couples Therapy, Week 9. Already feels less like healing and more like triage. Lucas pushes back from his chair, the scrape violent. I'm done. I'm not pretending anymore. The door slams so hard, the framed hope poster rattles, then drops. Lila doesn't even flinch. She just sinks, shoulders curling in, breath shrinking, until she's 12 again, watching her dad's taillights melt into the dark, knowing he wasn't coming back. The therapist inhales to speak. Lila beats her to it. Her voice is thread-thin, but it slices the room open. Every time someone walks out that door, I turn into the kid everyone decided wasn't worth keeping. So congratulations, Lucas. You didn't leave me today. You left me 15 years ago. The silence after isn't a pause. It's a crater. One door slammed, one childhood wound ripped open in front of 10 people who don't know where to look. And now everyone in the room realizes the same thing. Whoever walks back through that door next is going to change the entire story. I never thought a compliment could feel like a cage. Lila's voice broke the circle's quiet hum, her words landing soft but sharp in the modest therapy room. Faded cushions lined the floor, their worn fabrics absorbing the faint scent of chamomile tea from styrofoam cups scattered nearby. The walls, painted a muted sage, held posters of intertwined hands and quotes about blooming through cracks. Gentle reminders in a space built for unraveling. Marcus shifted on his cushion, knees drawn close, his broad shoulders curving inward like a shield against the weight pressing on him. He nodded slowly, eyes fixed on the frayed edge of the rug beneath them. Supporting this group had become his anchor, even as resentment simmered unspoken in his chest. A heat he swallowed down to keep the peace. "Yeah," he murmured, his tone steady but laced with strain. For me, it was the way she'd ask about my day, but only to twist it back to hers. Like my words were just echoes she could reshape. The therapist, a woman with silver-streaked hair and a notebook balanced on her lap, leaned forward slightly. "Take your time, Marcus. We're here to listen, not fix." Her voice wove through the air like a lifeline, inviting without demanding. Sophie sat across from him, fingers twisting the hem of her sweater, the soft wool bunching under her nails. She wanted to speak, to claim the space her voice so often lost, but doubt coiled tight in her gut, whispering she wasn't ready, wasn't enough. Her eyes darted between Lila and Marcus, unease prickling her skin like invisible threads pulling her back into old patterns. Lila exhaled, her withdrawn posture easing just a fraction as she met their gazes. Reclaiming herself meant facing these imperfections head-on, even if fear of rejection clawed at her throat. At first, it was the little silences, after I'd share something real. He'd nod, say he understood, but his eyes would glaze over, like I was fading right there. I started hiding parts of me, folding them away to keep the peace. But it hollowed me out. The room held its breath, the faint tick of a wall clock marking the contemplative pause. Marcus rubbed his temple, the gesture betraying the overwhelm building inside him. He drove himself to lift others, but tonight his own needs gnawed louder. Resentment toward the partner who'd drained him dry, leaving him fearful of cracking under the load. "I kept giving," he said, voice dropping lower, planning dates, fixing her moods, until I forgot what I even wanted. One night, she snapped at me for being too available, and I just agreed. Like my strength was the problem. Sophie's breath hitched. The unease swelled, a quiet storm in her chest, mirroring the disconnection they described, losing herself in someone else's tide. She leaned forward, hesitant words forming on her lips. Mine started with apologies. I'd say sorry for everything, even breathing too loud. He called it caring, but it was control, chipping away until I didn't recognize the girl who used to laugh without permission. Her voice trembled, self-doubt shadowing her drive to stand tall. Yet in sharing, a fragile connection sparked. The group's nods, the subtle squeezes of hands on knees, offered support amid the fracture, hinting at resilience waiting to mend what toxicity had torn. As the stories intertwined, the air warmed with shared vulnerability, unease lingering like a shadow, but yielding to the hopeful thread of recognition. They weren't alone in the break, and perhaps, together, they could rebuild. Lila's words settled like a gentle weight on the circle, stirring echoes of recognition in the dim light of the therapy room. The faded cushions cradled weary bodies, their textures a soft anchor against rising vulnerability. In that contemplative hush, the group's quiet strength wove through the air, hopeful threads of resilience pulling one another closer, ready to embrace the raw truths waiting to surface. His words twisted everything I said, like he was rewriting me from the inside out. Emma's voice cracked on the last syllable, her hands clasped tight in her lap, as if holding back a flood. The circle of survivors shifted subtly on the worn cushions, the faint creak of floorboards under shifting weight punctuating her pause. Steam from the chamomile cups curled lazily upward, carrying that herbal whisper through the room's close air. Marcus leaned forward, elbows on knees, his broad shoulders hunching as if to shield the group from her pain. He wanted to wrap her story in reassurance, to be the steady anchor everyone needed. But resentment simmered beneath, a quiet burn from his own unspoken burdens. "That disconnection," he murmured, eyes fixed on the frayed edge of a cushion. "It's like you're watching yourself fade while someone else pulls the strings." I remember the first time I ignored my gut for her approval. Felt like I was erasing pieces of me, just to keep the peace. Sophie's breath hitched, her fingers twisting the hem of her sweater, the soft wool bunching under her grip. She ached to echo Emma's courage, to claim her own voice amid the shared ache. Yet doubt clawed at her, whispering she wasn't worthy of the space, that speaking up might shatter the fragile safety here. Still, the words bubbled up, hesitant but insistent. He'd start with little things, compliments that sounded right but left me smaller. I'd catch myself in the mirror, wondering who that stranger was staring back. Like my edges were blurring into his expectations. Her gaze flicked to Emma, a tentative bridge of solidarity, even as her inner critic sneered at the vulnerability. Jasmine nodded slowly, her dark curls falling forward as she absorbed the weight of it all, her drive to mend these fractures pulling her deeper into the collective hurt. She felt their pain seeping into her own chest, heavy as unspoken secrets, her fear of abandonment urging her to hold space without crumbling. "It's that slow poison," she said softly, reaching out to touch Emma's knee lightly, the warmth of skin against denim a small act of tethering. "You give a little ground, and suddenly you're adrift from who you were." I took on his storms as mine, thinking it would keep us close, but it just hollowed me out. Emma wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand, the salt sting of tears sharp against her skin. The room held its breath, then exhaled in murmurs of agreement, the circle tightening like roots seeking soil. Marcus straightened a fraction, his resentment easing into resolve. He couldn't fail them, not here. Not when this raw sharing felt like the first crack of light through stone. Sophie untwisted her sweater, a quiet defiance blooming as she met Jasmine's eyes, the self-doubt receding just enough to let hope flicker. Jasmine drew her hand back, carrying the group's ache but not drowning in it, her connections weaving stronger threads of resilience. In that shared fracture, vulnerability wove through them not as a break, but as the beginning of mending, each story a step toward reclaiming the selves they'd lost. The silence that enveloped the circle was thick with empathy, Emma's raw vulnerability hanging like a fragile thread binding them all. Soft breaths rose and fell in unison, the dim lamplight casting gentle shadows on faces etched with quiet resolve. In that shared hush, a subtle shift rippled through the group, shoulders easing, gazes lifting, as the courage she'd unleashed began to kindle flickers of hope, drawing forth the next hidden wound. Have you ever woken up feeling like a stranger in your own skin? Lucas's voice broke the hush, his eyes fixed on the flickering candle at the circle's center, its wax pooling like unshed tears. The words hung there, pulling nods from the group. Sophie shifted on her cushion, the rough wool scratching her palms as she pressed them together. She could taste the faint bitterness of chamomile tea lingering on her tongue from earlier, a small comfort in this room scented with aged wood and shared breaths. Lucas continued, his confession unfolding like a wound reopening. It started with little things, him saying I was too sensitive, too ambitious. Years of it chipped away until I couldn't remember who I was without his voice in my head, telling me I wasn't worth the effort. Jasmine leaned forward, her drive to connect urging her on even as overwhelm tightened her chest. She wanted to absorb his pain, to weave it into something bearable for him, but the fear of abandonment clawed at her. What if sharing too much pushed everyone away? I know that erosion, she said softly, her fingers tracing the frayed edge of her scarf. With mine, it was the constant apologies I didn't owe. He'd twist my successes into burdens, like my joy was stealing his light. I'd wake up apologizing in my sleep, disconnected from the woman who used to laugh without permission. The circle breathed with her, a supportive rhythm that slowed Sophie's racing heart. She hesitated, her inner critic whispering she wasn't brave enough, that voicing this would drag her back into codependency's grip. But Emma's raw honesty earlier echoed in her, a fracture she couldn't ignore. For me, Sophie began, her voice tentative, like testing thin ice. It was the silence. He'd fill every conversation with his needs, and I'd shrink, doubting my own thoughts. I lost my voice long before I lost him, felt like I was fading, not good enough to claim space. Her words carried the sadness of that disconnection, a deep ache that pooled in her throat, yet saying them aloud sparked a quiet resilience, a thread pulling her toward reclaiming herself. Lila sat withdrawn, knees drawn up, the soft hum of the overhead fan stirring the loose strands of her hair. Vulnerability terrified her. Rejection loomed like a shadow in every conflict. But Lucas's story mirrored her own hidden fractures. She hugged her arms tighter, the cotton of her shirt warm against her skin, grounding her. I hid from it all, she admitted finally, her tone laced with fear. Mine would criticize my flaws until I withdrew completely, pretending they didn't exist. But that just buried me deeper, away from who I really am. Embracing the mess, it scares me, but ignoring it left me so alone. The confessions rippled outward, each one a shared fracture mending in the telling. Jasmine reached out, her hand brushing Sophie's briefly, a gesture of solidarity that eased the overwhelm. Sadness wove through the air, heavy yet purifying, like the slow release of long-held breath. In this circle, disconnection gave way to tentative bridges, hopes of voices found, selves reclaimed, imperfections owned. The candle flame danced steady, illuminating faces etched with resilience, as the night promised more than just survival. The circle's hush deepened, regrets lingering like shadows in the candle's glow, as voices rose one by one, unraveling layers of hidden wounds. Sophie's palms still itched from the wool, her own unspoken sorrows echoing in the air, resilient yet raw. With each story shared, the group's reflections turned inward, a supportive weave of vulnerability hinting at paths forward, even as doubts about true mending began to surface. Jasmine uncrossed her legs and leaned into the circle's dim glow, her fingers tracing the frayed edge of the woven mat beneath her. The candle's flame danced higher for a moment, casting elongated shadows that licked at the walls of the small room. Around her, the group exhaled in unison, the weight of Lucas's confession still settling like dust after a long silence. "I cope by listening," Jasmine said, her voice steady but threaded with the ache of too many burdens. She glanced at Lila, whose knees drew tight to her chest, arms wrapped like a shield. "Like right now, hearing all this, it pulls at me, makes me want to fix it all." Her drive to heal others surged, but so did the fear of abandonment, the shadow of absorbing their fractures as her own. She felt the room's supportive hum, yet her chest tightened with the strain of holding space for everyone. Lila's eyes flicked up, then down again, her withdrawn state coiling her deeper into herself. She picked at a loose thread on her sleeve, the soft rasp audible in the quiet. "Fixing sounds nice," she murmured, barely above a whisper. "But what if it's just pretending? I tried journaling once, pouring it all out on paper. It helped for a day, then the fear crashed back. Rejection, vulnerability. I crumpled the pages and hid them. Her drive to reclaim her imperfect self warred with the impulse to retreat, conflict making her voice fracture. Regret bloomed in her pause, sharp as the scent of cooling tea leaves from the side table. A reminder of words unsaid in past fights, connections she let slip away. Marcus shifted beside her, his hand clenching the arm of his chair with a faint creak of wood. He released it slowly, the resentment simmering beneath his overwhelmed facade. "Pretending or not, I've been the supporter too long," he admitted, his tone contemplative, laced with the hope of release. "I cook meals after bad days, listen without complaint. But inside, I'm failing them, failing myself. What if these strategies are just bandages on a wound that won't close?" His fear of weakness gnawed, the unexpressed anger bubbling up in the way his foot tapped a restless rhythm against the floor. He looked to Jasmine, then Lila, the codependent threads pulling taut, escalating the pressure, until self-doubt echoed in the air like a shared pulse. The group murmured agreements, voices overlapping in a tapestry of doubt. Sophie nodded from across the circle, her earlier shift now a full lean forward. "Healing possible? Sometimes I wonder if we're just chasing shadows," she added, but her eyes held a spark of resilience, inviting more. Jasmine reached out, her palm hovering before gently touching Lila's knee, a supportive bridge amid the strain. "We've all regretted pulling away or pushing too hard," she said softly, her own overwhelm mirroring theirs. "But here, sharing this, it feels like a start, not perfect, but real." Lila's fingers stilled, a tentative warmth spreading as she met Jasmine's gaze. Marcus exhaled, the resentment easing into something hopeful, the room's atmosphere wrapping them in quiet encouragement. In that moment, regret lingered, a poignant echo of lost chances and unspoken pains, yet it fueled their resolve. The candle burned on, its light steady against the gathering dusk within. As the dust of Lucas's words lingered in the air, Jasmine's gaze drifted inward, her breath syncing with the group's quiet rhythm. In that suspended hush, a flicker of resolve stirred within her, resilient threads weaving through the shared vulnerability. Yet, as the circle reformed, an undercurrent of questioning rippled beneath the supportive glow, hinting at voices ready to push beyond reflection toward something bolder. The candle's flame steadied, illuminating paths yet untraveled. The newcomer's words sliced through the lingering hush, leaving a raw sting in the air like the bite of fresh-cut herbs. Lila's breath caught, her hands folding inward, as if to cradle the fragile space she'd carved out in the circle. Around her, the woven mat's threads pressed into her palms, grounding her against the sudden swell of voices. "Why are we just sitting here, spilling our guts?" the newcomer pressed, his voice edged with urgency, eyes darting from face to face. He leaned forward, elbows on knees, the faint scent of coffee clinging to his shirt. "Talk all we want about pain, but nothing changes. We need plans, real steps, not this endless loop of stories." Marcus shifted beside Lila, his shoulders hunching under an invisible load, the creak of the wooden floor echoing his unrest. He'd come to listen, to offer quiet nods that masked his own unraveling. But now, resentment flickered in his chest like a spark he dared not fan. "It's not that simple," he said, his tone measured yet strained, words tumbling out slower than he intended. "Sharing, it builds something. Without it, how do we even know what we're fighting?" His fingers absently traced the rim of his untouched water glass, the cool condensation slick against his skin, a reminder of needs he'd long ignored. Sophie, across the circle, felt her pulse quicken, the inner voice whispering that she was too small for this fray, too hesitant to claim space. She wanted to speak, to assert the voice she'd been nurturing in stolen moments alone, but doubt coiled tight around her throat. The room's dim light from the single bulb overhead warmed her cheeks, yet chilled the resolve she'd pieced together. "Maybe he's right," she murmured, her gaze dropping to the mat's intricate patterns, each weave a mirror to her tangled fears. "We've talked circles around our codependency, me leaning on you all, you carrying too much. But action? That means risking everything. Her words hung, vulnerable, pulling at the threads of their shared fragility. Lila's withdrawal deepened, her body curling slightly as rejection loomed in the challenge, a shadow she'd fled too many times. Yet beneath the fear, a quiet resilience stirred, urging her to face the imperfections she'd hidden. "I get it," she said softly, her voice emerging like a thread pulled from the loom, steady despite the tremor. "Stories feel safe, but they're just the start. I've withdrawn before, pulled away when it hurt most. If we act, we might break, or finally stand." The group's eyes turned to her, the air thickening with the scent of melting candle wax and unspoken hopes. The discussion surged then, voices overlapping in a contemplative rhythm. Marcus's resentment surfacing in clipped questions, Sophie's self-doubt yielding to tentative suggestions, Lila's fear ebbing into a hopeful bridge. Panic flickered in stolen glances, self-doubt etching lines on their faces. But in the supportive glow of shared breaths, reflection took root. They weren't fixed, not yet, but in this escalation, each glimpsed the strength to step beyond the circle's edge, imperfections and all. The raw sting lingered, weaving through the circle like threads pulling taut, as murmurs rippled outward from the newcomer's challenge. Lila's grip tightened on the mat, her pulse echoing the group's unease, yet beneath it stirred a quiet undercurrent, a shared ache yearning for more than words. In that suspended hush, frustration bloomed into resolve, the air thickening with unspoken possibility, drawing eyes toward Emma as she rose, her silhouette a beacon of emerging hope. Sophie's chair scraped back against the wooden floor, the sharp sound splintering the circle's fragile quiet, like a fault line in dry earth. Heads turned, eyes widening in the dim lamplight that cast long shadows across the faded cushions and scattered notebooks. The air carried the faint, earthy scent of cooling chamomile tea from half-empty mugs, a reminder of the calm they'd been chasing moments before. She rose unsteadily, her palms slick with the residue of nervous sweat, heart pounding a rhythm that echoed the doubts swirling in her chest. "We can't keep whispering around this," Sophie said, her voice cracking at first, then gaining edges honed by too many swallowed words. "Our pasts, they're not ghosts we can ignore. They're chains. We have to face them, drag them into the light, or we'll just keep looping back into the same traps." Marcus shifted beside her, his broad shoulders tensing under the weight of her outburst. He'd been the one holding the space earlier, nodding through the newcomer's raw confessions, his own resentment bubbling just beneath his steady gaze. Now, as Sophie's words hung there, he felt the familiar pull, to soothe, to support, even as his chest tightened with the fear of cracking under it all. "Sophie," he murmured, reaching out a hand that hovered but didn't quite touch her arm, the calluses on his fingers brushing the air instead. The gesture spoke of his drive, that endless urge to prop others up while his own foundations eroded. But inside, anger flickered, hot and unvoiced, at how her stand-up moment dragged his hidden fractures into view. Jasmine leaned forward from across the circle, her dark curls falling like a curtain over eyes rimmed red from absorbing everyone's pain. She wanted to bridge this, to weave their frayed threads into something stronger, but the overwhelm pressed on her like an inherited bruise. "She's right," Jasmine said softly, her voice a gentle current cutting through the tension. "I've been carrying pieces of all your stories, and it's breaking me open. But if we do this together, confront it head on, maybe we heal not just ourselves, but each other." Her fear of abandonment clawed at her, yet in voicing it, she felt the first stir of release, a tentative hand extended into the unknown. The room pulsed with their shared breath, the woven mat beneath them absorbing the subtle shifts of feet and knees. Sophie stood taller now, her hesitation fracturing into resolve, though the inner critic whispered she was too flawed for this boldness. Panic flickered in Marcus's eyes, a shadow of doubt about his ability to keep showing up without shattering. But Sophie's fire kindled something in him, a spark against his resentment. Jasmine nodded, her tendency to hoard their hurts easing as the idea took shape. "Then let's make it real," Marcus said, his tone steadying, the words pulling him from his overwhelm. A project. Something public. We raise awareness about these toxic cycles. Codependency. The way it sneaks in and steals your breath. Flyers. A workshop. Whatever it takes. We confront it as a group. Murmurs of agreement rippled out, unanimous and warm, like sunlight piercing through cracked blinds. Sophie sank back into her seat, a quiet resilience blooming in her chest, the self-doubt receding just enough to let hope filter in. The circle reformed, not tighter but more alive, their drives intertwining against the escalating strain. In that shared decision, the pressure didn't lift, it transformed, forging a path forward where vulnerability became their strength. As the echoes of the scrape faded, a collective breath rippled through the room, drawing the group back from the brink of fracture. In the warm glow of shared glances, vulnerability softened into strength, threads of stories weaving tighter. Minutes stretched like dawn-light piercing fog, until nods of resolve sealed their pact. A fragile yet fierce commitment to rise together. Hearts steadied by the quiet power of endurance. I can't keep pretending anymore. The words claw up from my chest, raw and unbidden, as Sophie's voice cracks the circle's hush. Her chair's scrape still echoes in my ears, a gritty reminder that silence has teeth. I, Jasmine, sit frozen, my hands twisting the frayed edge of my notebook, feeling the paper's rough bite against my skin. Everyone's eyes flick to her now, then to me, waiting. The lamplight warms the wooden beams overhead, casting a golden haze over the scattered mugs of cooling tea, their herbal scent lingering like a half-forgotten comfort. Sophie swallows hard, her gaze dropping to the floorboards, etched with years of scuffs from restless feet. I thought if I just smiled through it, acted strong, no one would see how scared I am. Her admission spills out, tentative at first, like water testing a crack in stone. She lifts her chin, eyes glistening but steady. But I'm tired of that voice in my head, the one saying I'm not enough. It pulls me back, makes me doubt every step I take toward me. The room breathes with her words. I feel it, the pull of her vulnerability tugging at my own edges. My drive to connect surges, but so does the fear. That old shadow whispering I'll drown in this if I let it in. Lila shifts beside me, her knees drawn up, fingers tracing invisible patterns on her jeans, the denim whispering softly under her touch. She's always been the quiet one, her withdrawal a shield I've envied and ached to breach. I get it, Lila murmurs, her voice a threadbare whisper that surprises us all. She unfolds slightly, like a fern uncurling toward light. I hide too. Every time things get real, I pull away, afraid you'll all see the mess and leave. Her eyes meet mine, then Sophie's, holding there with a fragile courage. The air between us thickens, not with weight, but with the shared pulse of truths laid bare. Scents of chamomile and worn cushions mingling with the faint salt of unshed tears. I lean forward, my heart pounding against my ribs like a drum calling others to rise. Overwhelmed, yes, their pain seeping into me like ink on wet paper. But this is connection, not burden. We're all carrying it, I say, my words gaining strength as they leave my lips. Me included. I take on your hurts because losing you terrifies me more than feeling them. But maybe that's our strength, sharing the load instead of hiding from it. Sophie nods, a small smile breaking through, lighting her face like dawn on frost-kissed glass. Then let's not stop here. Her hesitation fades, voice firming with purpose. What if we turn this into something? An awareness campaign, to show others it's okay to crack open. Lila exhales, a soft sound of release, her shoulders easing. Later today? After we catch our breath? Yes, I agree, the word blooming warm in my throat. We rise together, the circle reforming not in chairs, but in glances and nods. The wooden floor creaking under our steps, like an old friend bearing witness. Notebooks gather, ideas already flickering like embers stirred to life. In this moment, vulnerabilities exposed, we stand taller, not unbroken, but resilient, threads weaving toward a shared horizon. The door swings open to afternoon light, and for the first time, the path ahead feels like ours to claim. Days blurred into a tentative resolve, the raw ache of that circle lingering like a bruise beneath my skin. Vulnerability had cracked me open, but in its wake stirred a quiet resilience, weaving through sleepless nights and whispered doubts. By week's end, as we gathered once more, the air hummed with unspoken support, my notebook clutched like a shield, ready to transform our shared fragility into something unbreakable. That's when Jasmine realized the weight of Sophie's confession had cracked something open in all of them. Not just her, but the fragile shells each person carried into the room. The circle of mismatched chairs creaked under shifting bodies, the faint scent of cooling coffee mingling with the sharp tang of marker ink from the whiteboard propped against the wall. Ideas for the awareness campaign floated tentative at first, scribbled in looping script. "Community walks," Marcus suggested, his voice steady but his pen digging divots into the notepad, as if anchoring his own unraveling thoughts. Excitement flickered like a candle in drafty air, everyone leaning forward with notebooks splayed, but apprehension laced every pause, every averted glance. Lila hunched over her sketch pad, her pencil tracing hesitant outlines of protest posters, bold colors bleeding into softer, blurred edges that mirrored her guarded posture. She wanted to reclaim herself, to pour her imperfections into something visible, yet fear coiled tight in her chest, whispering of rejection if she let the colors run too free. "What if we make videos?" she ventured finally, her words soft, almost lost in the rustle of turning pages. Real stories, people talking about breaking free. Her eyes darted to Jasmine, seeking approval, but her fingers clenched the pencil until the wood warmed under her grip. Jasmine nodded, her drive to connect pulling her upright despite the overwhelm crashing in waves. Sophie's raw admission still echoed, layering onto Lila's quiet plea, Marcus's unspoken strain. She absorbed it all, her own pain blurring with theirs, fearing the abandonment that might follow if she couldn't hold the group together. "That's powerful, Lila. Let's build on that." Her voice aimed for warmth, but it wavered, revealing the facade slipping. The room's fluorescent hum buzzed overhead, casting elongated shadows across the table, strewn with half-eaten pastries and crumpled drafts. She reached for a marker, uncapping it with a click that felt too loud, too exposing. Marcus cleared his throat, his broad shoulders tensing as he added, "We could tie in workshops, hands-on stuff, where folks learn to spot the signs." He supported them effortlessly, ideas flowing from him like a steady current. Yet resentment simmered beneath, his needs shoved aside again, the fear of seeming weak gnawing deeper. His shadow anger flickered in the way he gripped the chair arm, knuckles paling, but he pushed it down, focusing on the group's spark. "I've got contacts at the community center. We make this real." Apprehension hung in his clipped words, excitement battling the exhaustion of always carrying more. As ideas piled up, flyers with survivor testimonials, social media threads weaving personal threads into a collective tapestry, vulnerability seeped through the cracks. Lila's sketches grew bolder, her withdrawn shell fracturing with each shared laugh, a tentative hope blooming in the supportive nods around her. Jasmine felt the pull, her overwhelmed heart easing just a fraction, as connections formed, resilient threads binding their fears. Marcus's resentment softened in the rhythm of collaboration, his drive to help finding space amid the group's gentle insistence that he speak his piece too. The session stretched, contemplative pauses giving way to flowing exchanges, each revelation a step toward healing, not perfect, but achingly real. In that circle, masks didn't shatter, they simply grew lighter, allowing glimmers of true selves to emerge. 3 days later, the group reconvened in the familiar room, sunlight filtering through dust motes like fragile promises. The weight of shared confessions had settled into a quiet resilience, weaving invisible threads of support among them. Jasmine traced the whiteboard's faint lines, her mind turning over possibilities born from that cracked openness. Yet beneath the hopeful stirrings, an undercurrent of fear stirred. The vulnerability of stepping further into the light, identities no longer shielded. As voices began to rise with tentative ideas, the air hummed with contemplative tension. The faint squeak of a marker cap snapping shut jolted Lila back. Her father's voice, gravelly over the phone, Don't let them see you break, kid. She blinked, the memory dissolving into the circle of faces around her, the whiteboard's ghosted lines blurring under the fluorescent hum. Emma leaned forward, her notebook balanced on her knee like a shield. What if we weave in testimonials? Real stories, from us. Not just stats on the campaign posters, but voices, faces even. Her words landed soft but insistent, stirring the air thick with a residue of confessions. Sophie's raw admission still echoing in the pauses. Marcus shifted, his chair groaning against the linoleum. He rubbed his thumb along the edge of his coffee mug, the ceramic warm from hours of cooling neglect. Publicly? That's exposing. What if it backfires? People judge. They twist words. His drive to support clashed against the knot in his gut, that fear of failing them all, of his own needs spilling out like unchecked anger. He glanced at Sophie, then away, as if voicing it might crack the fragile balance. Sophie straightened, her fingers twisting the hem of her sweater, the wool soft and worn from too many anxious nights. I get it. Anonymity feels safe. But hiding, it's what kept me small. Her voice gained edges, confidence threading through, yet her inner critic whispered louder now. Not good enough for the spotlight, you'll fade back into nothing. I won't lose myself again. Lila listened, the push-pull exposing fissures, her fear of rejection mirroring Marcus's dread of weakness, Sophie's battle against invisibility binding them. In the swell of it, Lila felt the mask slip fully. Okay, she breathed, voice steadying with resilient spark. I'll share. Not all at once, but enough. Tears pricked, not from defeat but release. The hopeful weight of being seen, vulnerabilities laid bare in this safe orbit. Marcus nodded, his anger softening into resolve, while Sophie reached out, a hand bridging the space. The circle tightened, not in fracture, but in quiet mending, fear's edge yielding to the warmth of shared light. Emma's suggestion hung in the air, stirring a quiet undercurrent of doubt amid the group's contemplative nods. Lila felt the echo of her father's words mingle with her own lingering disappointment, a resilient thread weaving through the fluorescent-lit room. As the circle tightened, vulnerabilities surfaced like shadows yielding to dawn, fostering an unspoken invitation for deeper truths to emerge. The faint scribble of Sophie's pen against her notebook paper scratched like a hesitant confession in the quiet. Marcus shifted in his folding chair, the metal joints groaning softly under his weight, his gaze fixed on the whiteboard's faded marker lines that mapped out no answers, only echoes of half-spoken pains. I don't know if I can do this, Marcus said, his voice cracking like dry earth underfoot. He rubbed his palms together, the friction warming his skin, but doing nothing for the knot in his chest. Around the circle, the group, Sophie with her notebook clutched like a talisman, Jasmine twisting a loose thread on her sleeve, leaned in, the air thick with the unspoken weight of waiting. What if I open up and it's all just pathetic, judged, seen as weak, like I'm failing everyone by even trying? His words hung there, raw and unpolished, pulling at the threads of their own buried doubts. Sophie paused her scribbling, her pen hovering, the ink bleeding a tiny spot onto the page. She'd been gaining her voice these past sessions, pushing back against that inner whisper that deemed her unworthy. But Marcus's admission struck a chord deep in her codependent core. Disappointment flickered in her eyes, not at him, but at the years she'd spent molding herself to fit others' shapes, losing pieces of herself in the process. I get that, she murmured, her tone steadying as confidence bloomed. I used to think sharing meant I'd disappear into someone else's story. Like if I spoke my truth, I'd just confirm I'm not enough. But hiding it? That disappointment in myself every morning, staring in the mirror. It's heavier. Jasmine nodded, her fingers stilling on the thread, the soft snap of it breaking, underscoring her words. She was Clarity's reluctant student, her fear of abandonment a shadow that made her absorb pains like a sponge, until she swelled and sagged under the load. It's scary, isn't it? Pouring out the mess from those old relationships, the betrayals, the ways we let ourselves be used, and wondering if it'll push people away. Her voice wavered, but there was a resilient edge to it, like sunlight piercing storm clouds. Disappointment colored her reflection, too, in the boyfriend who'd ghosted her after she carried his grief as her own, leaving her hollow. I took on so much of his anger, thinking it would keep us close, and when it ended, I was left with nothing but my own scars. But sharing this, maybe it turns them into something stronger. The circle tightened, chairs creaking as bodies angled closer, the fluorescent lights humming a supportive lullaby overhead. Marcus exhaled, his conflicted heart easing just a fraction. Asserting this need to be heard, without the rage boiling beneath, felt like a small victory against his fear of letting others down. My ex, she always said I was too closed off. But opening up meant risking that anger spilling out wrong. Disappointing her, disappointing myself. He met their eyes, the vulnerability a bridge rather than a break. Sophie leaned forward, her notebook forgotten. Those scars, they're not failures. They're proof we survived the worst of it. My codependency? It nearly erased me. But look at us now, naming it. Jasmine reached out, her hand brushing Sophie's knee in a gesture of quiet solidarity, boundaries forming even as connection deepened. The shared hesitations wove together, disappointments transforming into a collective resilience, each story a step toward claiming their truths. In that moment, under the steady hum and the scent of fresh notebook pages, hope flickered like a candle refusing to gutter out. In the hush that followed Marcus's faltering words, the room seemed to breathe with them, vulnerabilities laid bare like fragile threads binding the group. A gentle acceptance settled over the circle, softening the edges of doubt, as reflections lingered in shared glances and tentative nods. Time folded softly in that supportive space, resilience blooming from the quiet, hinting at a collective spark ready to ignite into something enduring and hopeful. The echo of unspoken words that had lingered from Sophie's hesitant "I" now dissolved entirely, leaving only the faint hum of the fluorescent lights above, a steady pulse where confessions once faltered. Sophie closed her notebook with a soft snap, her fingers lingering on the cover as if anchoring the fragments she'd just voiced. The scars from her last relationship, those invisible welts of codependency that had blurred her edges until she barely recognized her own reflection, hung in the air like shared breath. She glanced at Jasmine and Lila, her voice gaining a steadier timbre, emboldened by the quiet nods that met her gaze. It wasn't just losing myself in him. It was believing I had to, that my worth was in how much I could bend. Jasmine leaned forward, her elbows pressing into the scarred wooden table, the cool grain biting into her skin. She traced the edge with a thumbnail, a habit born of absorbing too many burdens not her own. The fear of abandonment clawed at her even now, whispering that opening this wound might drive them away. Yet clarity flickered in her eyes, tentative but sharpening. I get that. Mine. He made me carry his storms, like they were mine to weather. I'd stay up nights, replaying his rages, convincing myself it was love if I just held on tighter. Her words spilled out, not in a rush, but measured, each one tested against the supportive circle they'd formed. She paused, inhaling the faint scent of chamomile from Leela's untouched tea, a reminder that vulnerability didn't have to end in isolation. Leela sat cross-legged on the worn cushion, her hands folded loosely in her lap, the fabric's subtle weave grounding her against the urge to retreat. Conflict always tugged her inward, a shadow pulling at the threads of connection she craved. But tonight, hope edged in, soft as the late afternoon light filtering through the blinds, casting elongated shadows that danced rather than loomed. For me, it was the silence after every fight. I'd wait for him to come back, pretending my heart wasn't fracturing each time he walked out. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied, confronting the rejection she dreaded head-on. Those breaks, they're still there, but sharing them, it makes them feel like proof I've endured. The room held their truths now, not as burdens, but as maps etched with survival's ink. Sophie felt her inner critic hush, replaced by a quiet assertion blooming in her chest. No more fading into others. This was her voice, claiming space. Jasmine exhaled, the weight of others' pain lifting slightly as boundaries took tentative shape. She could listen without owning. Leela unclasped her hands, reaching out to touch Sophie's arm, the warmth of skin on skin a bridge over her withdrawal. Vulnerability met not with rejection, but resonance. In that contemplative pause, where regrets once echoed alone, an idea sparked. Sophie straightened, her eyes alight with newfound purpose. What if we didn't let these stories stay hidden? We could make videos, our experiences woven with real advice on spotting the red flags, building healthier paths. Jasmine nodded, a smile breaking through her struggle, clarity turning to action. Yeah, boundaries in motion. Show others they're not alone in carrying this. Lila's tentative hope solidified, her fear receding like a tide. Together, our scars as guides. Acceptance settled over them, resilient and warm, the missing pieces of isolation replaced by the solid weave of their shared resolve. The hum of the light seemed brighter now, a quiet affirmation that survival was not solitary. In the quiet days that followed, Sophie's tentative fragments blossomed into a resilient spark, drawing her back to the circle of survivors. Under the warm glow of the community center's lamps, the group assembled once more, their notebooks open like invitations to heal. With the recorder's gentle whir igniting the air, a hopeful undercurrent of shared strength began to flow, even as faint ripples of discord hinted at the vulnerabilities yet to surface. Outside, the relentless grind of city buses, brakes hissing like distant warnings. Inside, the scratch of pens on paper, a fragile rhythm binding the circle. Jasmine leaned forward, her voice threading the quiet like a tentative stitch. Let's start with the beginnings. Mine was slow, a whisper of control that built into walls. She glanced at the small recorder on the table, its red light blinking steadily, capturing every word for the archive they hoped would heal others. Her hand hovered over her notebook, not trembling, but pressing the pages flat, as if to contain the spill. Lila nodded, her eyes flicking to Marcus before settling on the device. She uncrossed her legs, the wooden chair creaking under her shift. Okay, but how much? The raw edges, or just the shape? Her question hung, laced with that pull to connect yet shield herself. She wanted this, craved the shared weight, but the fear of rejection coiled tight, urging her to pull back. Marcus cleared his throat, his broad shoulders easing as he spoke. All of it. If we're doing this, we name the scars. His drive pushed him here, to voice needs without crumbling, though the shadow of unspent anger simmered beneath. He feared failing them, being the weak link in their fragile chain, yet asserting himself now felt like the first real step. The recorder whirred softly, a mechanical heartbeat. Jasmine hesitated, her clarity sharpening amid the struggle. Boundaries flickered in her mind. How much pain to borrow before it buried her? The details matter, she said, voice gaining ground. Like how he isolated me, one concern at a time. Friends faded. I became his echo. She met Lila's gaze, offering connection, without the old habit of absorbing every hurt. But Lila tensed, her fingers twisting the edge of her sleeve. Wait, do we have to relive every cut? I mean, my story. The nights I locked the door, waiting for the yelling to stop. That's enough, isn't it? More feels exposed. Vulnerability cracked her tentative hope, the shadow of withdrawal rising like a reflex. She leaned away, eyes darting to the window where bus lights streaked the dusk. Marcus interjected, his tone firm but laced with support. Exposed is the point. My ex, she twisted my silences into weapons. I'd swallow the anger, think I was protecting us, but it just festered. He paused, the admission pulling at him, a conflicted assertion blooming. Sharing the mess, that's how we see it's not weakness, it's survival. The clash ignited then, sparks in the warm lamplight. Jasmine pressed on, her fear of abandonment fueling a quiet insistence. If we skim, we're still hiding. I took his rage as mine for years, felt abandoned when I finally left. But look at us now. Her words wove resilience into the air, rich with the scent of cooling tea and worn journals. Lila exhaled, the withdrawal easing as courage flickered in her chest. "You're right. Fine, the full weight." He made me doubt my own voice, withdrew until I begged for scraps. Her voice steadied, hopeful threads emerging from the tentativeness. Marcus nodded, the group's pulse syncing with the recorder's hum. In that shared unveiling, their pasts sharpened into symbols, not chains, but badges of endurance. The outside clamor faded, leaving only their voices, rising together in quiet defiance. As the circle deepened into the night, voices wove through shared vulnerabilities, each story a thread strengthening the fragile bond. Yet beneath the supportive hum, Lucas felt the weight pressing in, the unspoken demand to bare his soul amid the city's unyielding pulse. Days blurred into contemplative silences, resilience flickering like embers in the quiet aftermath, hinting at fractures yet to surface, even as connection held them close. The community center's back room, dusk filtering through half-drawn blinds. The circle of chairs creaked under shifting weights as Jasmine's story trailed into silence, her confession about those building walls lingering like an unfinished sentence. Lila sat cross-legged on her cushion, notebook balanced on her knee, the faint scent of chamomile tea from earlier cups still warming the air. She traced the edge of her page with one finger, her drive to confront vulnerabilities pulling her forward even as fear whispered of rejection. "That was brave," she said softly, her voice tentative but laced with hope, eyes flicking to each face in turn. "It makes me think about my own starts, how I hide behind silence when things get real." Marcus nodded beside her, his broad shoulders hunched slightly, the conflicted pull of his emerging assertiveness warring with the dread of seeming weak. The wooden arm of his chair dug into his palm as he gripped it, steadying the anger simmering beneath. Anger at himself, for always supporting without voicing his own fractures. "Yeah," he murmured, his tone measured, contemplative. "I've been holding back too. This project, it's supposed to stitch us together, right? But I keep wondering if I'm just failing everyone by not saying what I need." Sophie leaned in from across the circle, her posture straighter now, confidence blooming in the way she met their gazes without flinching. The inner critic in her head, the one that echoed "not good enough," faded against her resolve to assert her identity, to push past codependency's pull. "We all are," she replied, her words gaining volume, resonant in the quiet space. "My beginnings were all about pleasing, losing myself in the mix. But this circle, these shares, it's making me see I don't have to." The rhythm of their exchange built slowly, pins scratching anew, the soft rustle of pages turning like breaths drawn in unison. Yet across from Lila, Lucas shifted uneasily, his face pale under the room's warm lamp glow. The pressure mounted in his eyes, the relentless demand to perform, to bare his soul in this collaborative story project they'd poured weeks into. His notebook lay closed on his lap, unyielding. I can't," Lucas blurted finally, his voice cracking the contemplative flow. He pushed to his feet, chair scraping harshly against the linoleum floor. "This is too much. The sharing, the expectations, it's overwhelming. I'm out." The words hung, raw and abrupt, as he grabbed his jacket from the back of the chair, the zipper's metallic rasp slicing the air. Betrayal rippled through the group like a stone dropped in still water. Lila's breath caught, her tentative hope fracturing as vulnerability's fear clawed up. Rejection, not just personal, but collective. Marcus's jaw worked silently, his shadow anger flaring hot, the fear of failing those he cared for twisting like a knot in his chest. He wanted to shout, to demand Lucas stay, but instead, his hands clenched, asserting needs in the silence that followed. Sophie felt it deepest, her gaining vocal strength tested as codependency's shadow loomed, urging her to chase and fix. "Lucas, wait," she started, but he was already at the door, shoulders bowed, the click of the latch echoing their shared wreckage. The room settled into a heavy pause, the three of them staring at the empty space. Lila reached out first, her hand brushing Marcus's arm, a tentative bridge. "We can't let this break us," she whispered, voice resilient amid the collapse. Maybe this is the wreck we needed to see, to reassess who we are without hiding. Marcus exhaled, slow and deliberate, his conflicted state easing into support. You're right. I need this too. Need to say it hurts, but we keep going. His words, asserted now, carried a quiet strength. Sophie nodded, her confidence solidifying, inner critic silenced by the connection sparking anew. Together, she affirmed, her hand joining theirs in the circle's center. The project's viability teetered, but in that cathartic breakdown, resilience wove through, hopeful threads pulling them closer. Identities reassessed not in isolation, but in the supportive hold of shared breath and unyielding gaze. As the circle dissolved into hushed goodbyes, Jasmine's unfinished confession wove through the dimming room like threads of fragile light, stirring Emma's guarded heart. The chamomile's warmth lingered on her skin as she slipped into the twilight streets, vulnerability's quiet power kindling a resilient spark. Hours later, under the soft glow of a single lamp, that same hope propelled her toward Lucas, the air thick with unspoken possibility. A few heartbeats of stunned quiet had unraveled the fragile threads holding the circle together. Jasmine's words about her walls now echoing in the dimming light of the community center's back room. Marcus shifted in his chair, the wooden frame groaning softly under him, his hands clasped tight enough to whiten his knuckles. He'd been silent too long, letting Sophie's gentle nods and Jasmine's raw admission fill the space, while his own chest tightened like a coiled spring. The chamomile scent had faded, replaced by the faint, earthy tang of old carpet and the metallic hint of the radiator humming in the corner. He wanted to speak, needed to, but the fear gnawed at him, whispering that any crack in his armor would shatter the support he'd built for them all. Sophie leaned forward, her dark curls falling across one shoulder, eyes fixed on Jasmine with a fierceness that surprised even her. Gaining confidence felt like flexing a long, dormant muscle, but here it was, surging through her veins. "Jasmine," she said, her voice steady yet laced with urgency. "You can't keep stacking those bricks forever. Remember what we found last week? That strength in letting it out?" She glanced at Marcus, including him in the pull, her inner critic silenced for once by the raw necessity of the moment. Jasmine's breath hitched, her fingers twisting the hem of her sweater, the soft wool bunching under her grip. She felt the familiar pull to absorb their pain, to mend it with her own exhaustion, but the desperation clawed higher. The group was her lifeline, yet her fear of abandonment made every vulnerability feel like a risk of isolation. "It's easy to say," she murmured, eyes glistening as she met Sophie's gaze. "But what if opening up just leaves me more exposed? What if you all walk away?" Marcus couldn't hold back anymore. The anger he'd buried simmered to the surface, not as a roar, but as a quiet insistence, pushing him to assert what he'd hidden. "We won't," he said, his voice rough but resolute, leaning into the chair's edge. "I've been doing the same, holding back because I think it'll keep you both safe. But failing you? That's what scares me most. Being weak in your eyes." He paused, the words tasting foreign, yet liberating on his tongue. His drive to express his needs finally breaking through the conflict. The room's shadows lengthened across the faded posters on the walls, symbols of past triumphs in this very space. But now they felt like mirrors to his own unresolved edges. Sophie nodded, her posture straightening as she confronted her own shadows head-on. "And I keep circling back to that old codependency, thinking if I just support enough, I'll matter. But that's not it. Our purpose here, the real one, isn't about fixing each other. It's about showing up as we are, walls and all, and choosing to stay." Her words hung, not heavy but inviting, a bridge across the wreckage. Jasmine exhaled, a tremor running through her as the catharsis hit, tears tracing warm paths down her cheeks. The breakdown came in waves, not shattering but reshaping, forcing her to see the boundaries she could claim without losing them. Marcus reached out, not to take control but to share it, his hand hovering until she nodded, their fingers brushing in a simple, affirming touch. Sophie smiled faintly, the resilience in the air palpable, like sunlight piercing through blinds. In that shared unraveling, a quiet hope bloomed, fragile, yet undeniable. They weren't whole yet, but together, they glimpsed the reassembled selves waiting on the other side. In the hushed aftermath, the weight of Jasmine's confession hung like a fragile veil, slowly giving way to murmurs of shared vulnerability. Marcus's grip eased, fingers uncurling as tentative glances sparked connections long buried. Days blurred into a tapestry of quiet reconciliations, resilience threading through the frayed edges of their circle. By the time they reconvened in the familiar glow of the studio, a buoyant hope lifted their spirits. Imperfections no longer divides, but the very rhythm binding them toward creation. 8:15 p.m. The community center's backroom clock ticked forward, its hands slicing through the hush like a quiet promise. Sophie leaned against the scarred wooden table, her fingers tracing the edge where years of community meetings had worn it smooth. The air carried the faint scent of cooling coffee from earlier brews, mingling with the earthy tang of old books stacked in the corner. She glanced at Jasmine and Lila, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the laptop screen, where the recording software waited, cursor blinking patiently. Marcus had stepped out moments ago, after a brief nod to the reconciliation with Lucas, news that rippled through the group like a shared exhale. Now it was just the three of them, the weight of the day's unraveling settling into something almost tangible. "I can't believe we're doing this," Sophie said, her voice steady but laced with the tremor of fresh resolve. She pushed back her hair, feeling the inner critic whisper that her words might falter, might pull her back into the shadows of codependency. But she pressed on, vocal now, asserting the identity she'd clawed back from fear. "After everything, Lucas coming around, us spilling our guts, it's like we've been holding our breath for too long." Jasmine nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears, the clarity she'd been chasing flickering into focus. She sat cross-legged on the threadbare rug, microphone in hand, the cool metal grounding her against the urge to absorb everyone's lingering pain. Boundaries, she reminded herself. Learn them, hold them, without severing the ties that mattered. "Yeah, my walls? They're still there, but cracked open. I was so scared you'd all leave if I didn't carry it all." Her laugh came soft, tentative, as she set the mic down and reached for Lila's hand. The fear of abandonment twisted in her chest, but here, in this circle, it loosened its grip. Lila squeezed back, her touch light yet deliberate, a bridge across the vulnerability she usually fled. She perched on the edge of a folding chair, knees drawn close, the fabric of her sweater brushing her skin like a hesitant embrace. Hope stirred in her, tentative but growing, as she met their gazes. "I almost walked out earlier. Conflict hits and I just withdraw. Hide." Her voice cracked, the shadow of rejection looming, but she didn't pull away. Instead, she straightened, the catharsis building like a wave cresting. "But seeing Lucas reconcile, hearing you both, it's making me want to stay, to try." The room seemed to breathe with them, the dim overhead light casting warm pools on their faces. Sophie hit record, the soft beep cutting the quiet, and they began, voices weaving stories of wreckage and rebuild, imperfections laid bare like threads in a tapestry. Laughter bubbled up first from Jasmine, a genuine spark as she recounted a fumbling boundary she'd set just that afternoon, freeing her from another's burden. Lila joined in, her words flowing freer, vulnerability transforming into strength, rejection's fear dissolving in the supportive hum of their shared rhythm. Sophie's confidence swelled, her inner critic silenced by the harmony of their voices. They sang of resilience, raw and unpolished, the melody imperfect but alive. As the track built, joy unfurled, quiet at first, then radiant, a light piercing the collapse of old selves. Hands clasped, breaths synced, they realized it. Their scars, their stumbles, these were the true notes binding them. The project wasn't just words on a screen, it was them, recommitted, rising together. When the final chord faded, silence bloomed, not heavy, but full. Sophie smiled, eyes shining. We're not perfect, but we're enough. And in that moment, the wreckage behind them felt like fertile ground, promising growth.